Hi, everyone. We're here today. I'm Dr. Maureen Gallagher, and I'm a psychologist, an interrelationship focusing trainer, and a somatic experiencing faculty member. And I'm here today to talk with you about healing developmental trauma with interrelationship focusing, one of my favorite tools to use in working with developmental trauma. So many of us and so many of our clients experienced early trauma and have gone on to live with the effects and the impact of that for our entire lives. And it's not all bad. There are many ways that we are stronger, more resilient, more self-aware, more sensitive as a result of challenging and adverse experiences. But some of the experiences we've lived through, we wish we weren't living with any longer. I have studied so many things in relation to working with developmental trauma, attachment theory, embodied practices like somatic experiencing, and interrelationship focusing. And I combine somatic experiencing and interrelationship focusing a lot to work with attachment-related trauma, attachment-related injuries that were experienced early in life and continue to have an impact on your life. I'm going to share some slides today and then do a guided visualization with you. Now, this is different than what we do in interrelationship focusing, which is a partnered practice. In interrelationship focusing, you often work either with a partner, both of you being trained in interrelationship focusing, and it's a pure partnership practice. So one that you can practice with any other person trained in interrelationship focusing, or many times you see a focusing oriented professional who's trained in interrelationship focusing in order to do one-on-one sessions. The pure practice is a fantastic support at any point in your life. Focusing oriented therapy, often for times when you're going through a particularly difficult time and really need the added support of having most of the attention be with your experience. So I'm going to share some slides. We're going to talk a little bit about what developmental trauma is, how it relates to living in survival mode, living in survival energy, how that relates to our attachment system, and how the tool of interrelationship focusing can be helpful with this. So here are ways to get in touch with me. Connect at MaureenGallagherPhD.com or my website, MaureenGallagherPhD.com, where you can find all the classes and trainings that I offer. So let's talk a little bit about developmental trauma. It's a term that we use to describe the impact of early trauma that is often repeated or chronic. It often involves loss within a child's important relationship. So when you were a child or children, this is usually experienced early in life, even immediately post-birth. I've studied a lot with Dr. Peter Levine, the developer of somatic experiencing. And one of the things that he says that I love is developmental trauma is shock trauma. Sometimes it gets lost that developmental trauma is trauma. And the trauma has physiologic impact. It affects our nervous system. It affects how we live in our bodies in ways that we are not in control of, in ways that are impacted by automatic processes within us, often those that are under the control of our autonomic nervous system. So all of the challenges that go along with having our autonomic nervous system take control of some of our processes and have us living in survival energy are things that we might be dealing with when having experienced trauma early in life. One of the things that is characteristic of developmental trauma is that it is a chronic condition. It's something that people have lived through usually for a long period of time. It's not a single event. It's often many, many events. It can include things like chronic misattunement as a child, experiencing a caregiver who never quite sees you accurately or chronically misattunes to your experience, either misinterprets you or misinterprets situations in a way that impacts you. Chronic physical neglect, emotional neglect. Neglect can be one of the hardest things to live through. You're either neglected in your physical needs, you don't get your needs met, you may have been hungry, you may have not lived in a chaotic environment, one that didn't care about your needs, or experienced emotional neglect, where your emotions weren't seen or attended to, where you weren't supported to better understand yourself emotionally. We're not born knowing what our emotions are. We're born having emotions, but often not really understanding what they are or what to do with them, which can lead to difficulties in regulation when we haven't experienced support in dealing with our feelings from early on in our lives. Developmental trauma can also be a result of chronic physical abuse or emotional abuse. And so here, the physical abuse would be living with violence, living with terror of pain and distress in your body. Similarly, with emotional abuse, being repeatedly exposed to or directly told things that were abusive toward you. It can also be traumatic when we're not seen or acknowledged in important aspects of our identity. So when you are growing up and you're not seen or responded to because a caregiver is not okay with some aspect of your being, whether that's as a result of your being neurodivergent, where your caregiver is neurotypical, or the opposite, your caregiver is neurodivergent and you're neurotypical, this can lead to a mismatch. Also, not unusual for people with particular sexual or gender identities to not have that reflected back in a way that's accepting or loving from a caregiver. And that can be traumatizing as you grow up. And not all adversity is experienced as trauma. One of the things that Peter Levine famously said is trauma is not in the event, but in the nervous system. So what you live through doesn't necessarily say whether you are traumatized or not. The impact that living through that adversity has had on your nervous system is what lets you know if something was traumatizing. And so it's about impact. If you lived through something incredibly difficult, challenging, but you were not traumatized by it, you didn't experience that as traumatic. You were resilient enough to live through it without being traumatized. Being traumatized has to do with our stress response. Every single one of us has a stress response. And we're wired to deal with the stress and stressors in our lives. This is a natural process of what we do when we experience something as stressful. And that system, the stress response system, can become overwhelmed when something is too much or happens too fast or too soon, like developmental trauma, where you're too young to deal with some of what you are going through. When something's more than we can handle, we are wired to handle that by moving into survival energy. and using survival strategies like fight, flight, freeze, fawn. These are survival strategies that we are not in voluntary control over. Our system is designed to move into survival energy in order to help us to live through challenging experiences. And when we're young, when we chronically need to be in survival modes, that can develop into a lasting experience of yourself. It can actually become indistinguishable from yourself. You can feel like you are your trauma. If you're hypervigilant, you feel like that's me. That's who I am. If you're shut down, you may feel like that's who you are. Collapsed, using fawn strategies, having excessive anxiety or depression, you may have never known yourself any differently than these experiences. They may feel integral to who you are. You may not have any memory of yourself as different from that, and yet they can be a result of trauma. Because survival strategies are coping strategies. We want to shift experiences that we have, that we come to identify with as us. If we have chronic hypervigilance, chronically shut down or collapsed, chronically in fawn strategies, chronically anxious or depressed, it can be essential to engage in shift that supports change in order to see that that is not us. That's a survival strategy that we're capable of and that helps us survive. But that does not mean that's who we are. It's what we're doing or how we're being. Those survival strategies can persist long after they've outlived their helpfulness. They were initially life-saving. They were the decision that our nervous system, our body, mind, being made of what we needed to do to survive the situation we were in. But then we grow. Our nervous system is most concerned with our survival. It wants us to live through whatever adversity, whatever challenge we're going through. And it's going to prefer to err on the side of surviving over thriving. It is more important that you survive to your nervous system. So its task is to keep you alive. And the survival strategies are designed to do that, to keep you alive. But when they're no longer necessary, then they can start to get in the way of our living the way we want to live. What that means is that what was helpful when you were 3 or 8 or 18 may no longer reflect the world you are currently living in, or more importantly, it may no longer reflect you. It may no longer reflect your capabilities, what you were capable of in order to survive when you were 3 is much more limited than what you're capable of when you're an adult, or even when you're 8 or 18. Your capabilities change over the course of your life. But if what gets encoded in your nervous system is, I faced this situation, and what I did was I shut down, I went into freeze, and I lived, your nervous system is going to remember that in its own way. And when it feels you're in danger again in some similar way, it's going to support you to shut down. Kind of having that sense memory, that procedural action tendency of like, this helped you live before, do it again. Even when it's no longer the best thing for you to do because you're different. You're older, you have more life experience, you're capable of different things, but your nervous system doesn't really reflect that all the time, doesn't update. I think of trauma as a physiologic preoccupation. Your body, mind, being is preoccupied by something that you have already lived through. And sometimes it continues to prepare you or live in a way that is prepared to encounter that again. We don't decide to be hypervigilant or anxious or depressed or shut down. Those are part of our survival strategies, and they're designed to help us survive adversity. We often think of these as negative, as something we want to get rid of. Of course, makes a lot of sense. No one wants to walk around depressed or anxious. And it's often really important to get that this was a survival strategy. Something in you, something not conscious, something subcortical decided that being revved up and ready to fly out of someplace, exit, get away, was designed to help you survive. Something that's brings you into shutdown, brings you into non-reactivity. You're no longer as reactive to something that someone might say or do. And sometimes that is the best way to survive if you are in the company of someone who is dangerous to you, especially if you're 3. Part of what differentiates living through adversity and being traumatized by it is that we continue to live in the survival responses that we used in order to survive our experience. That kind of speaks to, it was traumatic. It was too much. It was too fast. It was way too soon. We're still living that survival response because something in us says, I got to do this in order to survive. My best bet for surviving is to be highly anxious and ready to jet out of a difficult experience, to be revved up and ready to go, or to be depressed and shut down and non-responsive, underreactive to situations in your life. Our nervous system doesn't update very easily to new circumstances when what we have lived through has been chronic. Once we've lived through a chronic condition or situation, the nervous system starts to think, well, just leave that survival strategy on. It can't differentiate between, oh, okay, move into anxiety now or a flight response now, and now it's safe enough for you to relax and settle and be okay. It loses that flexibility, especially if what you lived through was chronic and you were young. It may settle into your nervous system almost like a habit or a preoccupation. It's a preoccupation, a physiologic preoccupation with survival. And what that physiologic preoccupation looks like is fight or flight or anxiety or depression or shutdown or some combination of those survival strategies. It doesn't update to our evolving capabilities. The thing that changes most in developmental trauma is you. You grow up, you change, you develop new capabilities, a new body, new resilience, new abilities, new emotional abilities, physical abilities, new strategies. We are different as adults than we were as children, even though we sometimes feel like there are many things that did not change enough. One of the ways that we are wired from before even we come into the world is through our attachment system. Our attachment system is a threat response system. So we have a threat response system, they're related, that assesses, appraises, recognizes novelty in our environment. Something is new. Can we see where it is? Can we identify with what it is? Can we evaluate whether it is a danger to us? That is, we do that with novel things in our environment. Our attachment system activates when we feel a threat in our relationships. So let's say someone calls you and says, we need to talk. We need to talk. I don't have time right now, but let's talk tonight. You might experience that as a threat, like, oh, there's something going on in my relationship. And if this is an important relationship to you, then it's an attachment relationship. It's someone who you see as someone in your life who you have a bond with. When we feel that threat, it's an attachment related threat, which are particularly important to people who've experienced developmental trauma. When we feel those threats, it can spur us to seek out those we're close to for reassurance, for comfort, for protection. Our attachment system is protective. So let's say you got that call and someone that you're close to said, "We need to talk." For some of us, we might reach out towards that person. "I can't wait till tonight. We have to talk now. I can't take no for an answer. I can't live for hours not knowing what it is." For others of us, we might take the opposite reaction. "Oh, I'm busy tonight. I think maybe later in the week. Maybe we can talk in 3 or 4 days." We want to withdraw and move even further away from the thing that feels threatening. And for some of us, we actually do some of both. We might initially move towards of like, "Yeah, let's talk now." And then, "No, wait a minute, I can't actually talk now." We might kind of go back and forth in what I think of as a push me, pull you. The attachment system itself is protective. It's designed to protect you. You might think about before you were 5 years old. Now, most of us will have some memories before we were 5. Some of us will just have a few memories. But if you want to think back to when you were in preschool or kindergarten, your earliest memories, when you were sick, hurt, sad, needed comfort, who did you turn to? Where did you go? Did you run to someone in your family? Was there a caregiver, a neighbor, a teacher, a friend that you would run to, a babysitter? That tells us a bit about who your attachment figures were. And it tells us a bit about how well or poorly that went. So if your memory is there's one person in your life who you always ran to whenever they were available, and that was comforting to you, that tells us one thing. If what happens for you is you feel a big blank, like there was no one. I don't think anyone cared if I was sick. I don't think anyone cared if I was hurt physically or emotionally. I remember putting on my own Band-Aids. I remember running to my room and reading a book or doing something in order to comfort myself, but there was no one. That tells us a different thing about your attachment system. Or my house was so chaotic, I never knew what I was going to find. And I don't think anyone even had time or energy to notice if I was doing well or poorly. That tells you a different thing about your attachment system and how available comfort and protection and reassurance were for you when you were a kid. And we internalize that. We internalize that usually in the first year of life. We don't remember it from our first year of life. That's why we ask like this question. It sort of mimics some of the questions on the adult attachment interview that looks at what was your attachment system like when you were a kid, which strongly predicts what your attachment system is like when you're an adult. Believe it or not, 50 to 65% of people are securely attached. Now, I know a lot of people in the helping and healing professions find that unbelievable, but it's true. That's what the research shows over and over again. Now, that's a pretty broad range, 50 to 65%. And obviously, it does not reflect people who come in for treatment for various things. It also doesn't accurately reflect helping and healing professionals themselves. So what is secure attachment? Well, it confers a general expectation that relationships are a positive thing in life, a source of reassurance and comfort, that it's worthwhile to move towards people, that there's help there, there's comfort there, there's reassurance, there's an expectation that relationships will be positive. And what that means, that there are 50 to 65% of people are securely attached, means that there's about 35 to 50% of people that are not securely attached. Insecure attachment breaks down into several ways of functioning: anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, fearful avoidant attachment. And these are all coping strategies. They're all coping strategies in order to survive a more challenging circumstance when you're young. And your system basically says, the way I'm going to deal with there not being adequate people for me to turn to in order to be reassured and comforted is I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to do that in a different way. So with anxious attachment, which can be a result of unpredictable availability of attachment figures early in your life, you might move towards attachment figures much more persistently and rapidly. Oh, you weren't here right now? Well, maybe you will be in 5 minutes. Or maybe if I text you and you don't answer, maybe if I call you, maybe if I go over to your house, maybe if I, and so the persistence and sometimes the escalation of the attachment request, the reaching out for attachment can become greater and greater and more urgent and more uncomfortable for the person who uses anxious strategies or is anxiously attached. For people who are avoidant, they might tend to withdraw in the face of difficulties, or feel rejected, or as though they need to move away from. I need to take a break. I need to take some time for myself so that I can feel more okay. I'll let you know when I'm available to connect again. And so the person who's avoidant can recognize all these things I'm talking about are behaviors. They're behaviors. Many people will tell me about their feelings. I felt anxious inside. And I might say, and what did you do when you felt anxious about that relationship? Oh, well, I called them 5 times in one night. That's an anxious strategy. So whatever you were feeling inside, that's an anxious strategy. Whereas if you say, I was feeling really anxious inside, it was causing me a lot of pressure. What did you do? I told them I was too upset. I could not speak. Maybe we can connect, I'm not even sure when. We're going to connect later. That's a more avoidant strategy. So the behavior is really, really important. It's not just how you feel. For the fearful avoidant person who might feel really scared inside, and might do their behavior might be more of a combination of moving towards and moving away. When we look at adult attachment, one of the people or groups really that I was really influenced by with regard to adult attachment is Phil Shaver, Mario Mickelenser, Marsha Hazan. And one of their contributions was to recognize that attachment is not categorical. It's not 4 little quadrants like you often see in relation to people who speak about childhood attachment. What they recognized was that attachment is basically organized along the dimensions of anxiety and avoidance in relation to attachment, and that it describes behavior. What we do when we feel threatened. And I talked about that just a few moments ago. We move towards with intensity or persistence. We move away, we take space, we withdraw, or we do both in that push me, pull you. We mostly think about attachment in terms of how we relate to other people. Bowlby was the original creator of attachment theory. And his work, we probably would not even remember Bowlby, except that an amazing thinker and researcher named Mary Ainsworth took Bowlby's work and created an incredible way to measure attachment in an experiment called the strange situation, which you may have heard of. Bowlby talked about internal working models of self and other. So your internal working model of others is how you perceive others and what you expect of them. For example, if you see people as helpful, like I generally think people are helpful, or I generally think people are rejecting, things like that. Let you know about your internal working model of other. And that has an impact on how we relate to other people. What we generally expect of people, like, oh, people don't like me. I'm not likable. Now, I'm not likable. We're starting to move towards our internal working model of self, how we view ourselves in terms of relationship. Like I'm lovable, people really, they tend to love me, or I'm unlovable. And people really don't see me as someone to love, or people find me irritating. Our perceptions of ourselves in relation to attachment relationships, of how we see ourselves in relationship to other people, forms these two important things: our internal working model of others, or how we perceive others, and our internal working model of ourselves. And those have to do with our attachment system, whether we are securely attached, which is where we basically view other people and relationships as a positive in our life, or are insecurely attached, where we don't view it as positively, although we've developed strategies in order to manage to have relationship that have to do with either moving toward or away from attachment figures, either more quickly, persistently, or urgently, or moving away from attachment relationships as a way of protecting attachment relationships. Like it protects my relationships if I take space from people. Then people don't get too irritated with me and my relationships go on. So it's actually protective. We're trying to protect our relationships, but we're not doing it in a secure way. Attachment is protective. So when we go through something traumatic, the state of our attachment system plays a role in whether that event will become a trauma, or whether it will be processed and not result in our experiencing it as traumatic. There's several protective features of attachment, and those affect our view of ourselves and of others. When we've lived through difficult or challenging life events, we can lose trust in ourselves, and we lack trust to be protective of ourselves, to handle situations, to have right-sized responses. So that trust in self can suffer greatly. I don't trust myself to handle it. I always screw it up. My reactions are too big. My reactions are too small. I overreact, I underreact. I don't have any feelings, and then I blow up. So whatever our style, you can begin to recognize how your attachment system can result in not trusting yourself. And so it becomes a vicious cycle, as well as leading to a lack of trust in others, because trust in others hasn't always gone so well, or we've been harmed by it. When we are securely attached, we build trust with others incrementally. We start slowly. Actually, we start before we even engage in something trusting. We start with an assessment of the rightness of trusting a particular person. And that assessment might be pretty good, or it might not be. We lose trust in ourselves if our assessments aren't so good. We then, let's say we do assess, I think this person feels pretty trustworthy. We trust them a little bit. And when we trust them a little bit, and what we find is, oh, yeah, that actually worked out. the person was reliable, they had integrity, they were trustworthy. Then maybe we trust a little more and a little more. And all the while, we're making assessments, both internal and external, not just of the other person, but of how we feel when we're with them, how we feel as a result of our interactions with them. These two things together combine to impact our self-esteem. How good we feel about our ability to rely on ourselves, as well as to make good assessments about relying on others and having others in our life that we feel we can rely on. So self-esteem versus having difficulties with self-esteem. I can't quite trust myself about these things. Confidence, like I'm pretty good at this, versus not having so much confidence in our ability to assess and engage with ourselves and others. So here's where the inner relationship focusing comes in. I love this tool in working, or this method in working with developmental trauma, because it really goes to the heart of that trust versus lack of trust in ourselves, of the building blocks of building trust in self, and of how to do that, a step-by-step process that leads to the strengthening of your sense of self and the strengthening of your ability to trust in yourself, which leads to greater self-esteem about yourself, and to then having a way of assessing, of noticing, and of going slowly in relationship to your trust and confidence in others. So this is a method that was developed by Ann Weiser Cornell and Barbara McGavin, and it's an extension of focusing, which was developed by Eugene Genlin. This extension of focusing by Cornell and McGavin extended itself from focusing to include parts work, or working with partial self states. And in that way, it's uniquely suited to healing relationship to self and our internal working model of self, how we see, perceive, and experience ourselves. And it supports the development of a supportive relationship to self that's neither anxious or critical nor dismissive, because those are the sorts of relationships that to ourselves that tend to happen when things haven't gone well in our lives. We can either become very critical of ourselves. You always screw up. You never get this right. You always screw up your relationships, or dismissive, like, don't even bother with that. Just let it go. Let go of all of your feelings. They're not helping you. So we can develop anxious relationships to ourselves, critical, or dismissive. As we heal from those tendencies, that supports the healing of the internal working model of self. So here's where Genlin started. Genlin developed the term the felt sense. You've probably heard of that term. The felt sense. I have a felt sense of relationship. So when you think about relationships, might be the relationship you're in now, might be the not being in a relationship right now, might be what relationship has been like for you in your adult life, might be what relationship was like for you as a kid. You might notice what we call a felt sense. The felt sense starts with attention to a meaningful bodily sensation. So you might take a moment even right now to just notice. If it's easy for you to feel sensation in your body, maybe notice if there are any sensations in your body. Maybe even take a hand and bring it to an area of your body where you're aware of having sensation. Could be your belly, your heart, anywhere within your body that you're like, oh, as I think about relationship in my life now, I feel a little tension in my belly. I feel a little tightness in my chest, or whatever it is that you feel. If sensation is not an easily available thing to you, you might be aware of something else. You might be aware of an emotion, a memory, an experience you've had, even a hope you have. And you might use that. That meaningful bodily sensation might be a meaningful feeling or a meaningful memory. Start with what comes for you. We're all a little different in what comes for us. Maybe take a moment and get that this experience communicates to you something about what relationship is like for you. If what you were thinking about, of like, what, the whole thing around relationships for me, and what comes for you, like, it's like I can't breathe. Noticing that. And so the first thing we do is we just notice it. And the next thing we do is we listen. So for many people, they've developed habits like talking to their bodies. In focusing, one of the first things we do is listen. We listen and we develop the ability to listen to our body, mind, being, which often doesn't communicate in words. Sometimes it does. Sometimes we might hear words like negative words, like you're a loser, or positive words like, you're such a sweetheart. We might notice something that we can speak, that speaks to us of okayness, like something in me feels relaxed. Now, I'm already starting to use a language that we use in inner relationship focusing, which is something in me. So let's say I'm noticing that tightness in my chest. Something in my chest feels tight. And when we start to move towards this way of languaging something in me, it also communicates that it's not all of me. I can have several experiences at the same time. Something in my chest is feeling tight, and I can be with that. So there's an I that can be with anything that arises within me, with interest, with curiosity, with compassion. And in inner relationship focusing, we call that self in presence. I know some of you might be trained in other parts work models and might have different words that you use to describe that experience. For IFS, I believe they call it self. In inner relationship focusing, we call it self in presence. And it all starts in inner relationship focusing with attention to a meaningful bodily sensation. One of the differences with inner relationship focusing is that it starts in some experience you have of your body. We also expand the definition of body, knowing that not all people have access to sensation. So however you experience your body, you might experience your body through a feeling. But I don't actually feel it as a sensation, but I have feelings and I'm aware of them. Or what comes for me are images or memories or metaphors. So however things represent themselves for you, and that's how you start, that's what you start with. So we do bring attention to the body, but we expand the definition of body, and then we listen with a broad definition for listening to include sensing, for sensation, mood, memory, associations, the felt sense of something. In inner relationship focusing, we're developing a relationship of I with it. The I that can be with anything, that is when I'm in self in presence, I can be with anything that arises within me with interest, curiosity, and compassion. And the one that I am sensing is the it. So the it's feeling troubled there in my stomach. So when we're self in presence, we can be with whatever arises within, with interest, curiosity, and compassion. And that is further supported by a companion, an IRF partner, or a focusing oriented therapist. So it could be someone you took a training with, you both took the IRF training, and now you have a partner someone that you focus with regularly, or someone you focus with every once in a while. IRF can be an amazing self-care practice. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it for anyone, particularly for people in the helping and healing professions. I think we don't have enough self-care practices that are truly meaningful and truly provide self-care, and IRF is one that truly does. It can be practiced with a peer partner, or you can see a professional when you just want time for yourself. It helps us to develop relationships with those partial self states. Having a sense of self and an awareness of parts really allows us to get that we are more than our parts. We're not just the angry part of us. We're not just the part of us that's grasping or needs to have this or that. We are more than those parts. When we sense inside, which is where we start in inner relationship focusing, is the sensing inside, we might come into contact with something, those meaningful bodily sensations. Or we might sense inside and sense nothing. If that happens, we might bring our attention inward and then wait. Because sometimes we bring our attention inside before there's anything to attend to. And what we want to attend to arrives a bit later. Sometimes we go inside and there's already one or even many things for us to attend to. When you become aware of something, it helps to take a moment to acknowledge it. You can literally say, oh, hello. Hello, feeling in my chest. Or I feel you. I'm aware of you. And then taking a moment to just be with it. Just like you're starting a relationship with someone outside you. We bring some of those same concepts to building a relationship inside you. So it can take some time for things to come into view. Sometimes what you first encounter is pretty vague or not well articulated. And please know, that's a great place to start. Not knowing means not yet known, not yet knowing. And you're here to start to get to know it. So not knowing is a gift. We want to allow awareness to grow, to meet what comes with interest, with curiosity, with compassion, and that allows more to come. You might say to yourself, take your time. Allowing yourself a lot of time can be one of the most important things that you can give yourself as you are sensing in to your own body, mind, being. This helps to get in contact with something inside that's like a bigger picture. Sometimes I think of it like the forest and the trees. We get lost in the forest. We can't even see where we are. And then we might emerge from the forest and be even 100 yards out. And we might be able to start to see, wow, that was a lot of trees. There's so much going on in that forest. And maybe we might take in one or two single trees. It might be like, that tree is so beautiful, or that tree is so scary. What perspective we take has a big impact on how we experience something and how we are with it. With focusing, within a relationship focusing, we often take a moment or come back regularly to the felt sense. And one of the ways we do that is asking ourselves about the whole thing about an issue, a relationship, or something in your life. So if you're focusing with developmental trauma, it could be with a particular memory, an experience, particular relationship, particular way you experience yourself. There are so many aspects of relationship that would benefit from spending time in an inner relationship focusing session with things that we have relationship with. Getting a felt sense of it allows you to move from being it, I am angry, to being with it. Something in me is angry, and I can be with that. This next part is really essential. Without an agenda to fix it or change it. Just like our relationships outside of us don't benefit from our trying to change or fix the people we're in relationship with, the same is true of getting in touch with things within us. If we come at those relationships with an attitude of wanting or needing to change or fix, not so much comes. When we take time and communicate to whatever is coming within us that we are interested in having a relationship, not in changing or fixing, more comes, and we might understand more, and we might be able to have a relationship that's comforting, reassuring, a true attachment relationship with what occurs within us. That's the relationship that supports healing. It allows organic movement and shift when we're seen and heard and felt and supported. We respond differently than when we're not. Next steps might start to show themselves or become clear when we're actually being held in who we are. Inner relationship focusing is an experiential method. It's an experience. It starts with somatic awareness, with awareness of our embodied states. It supports the development of self and presence, that ability to be with whatever arises within without trying to fix or change it, and to develop those relationships to parts or partial self states. All of this goes into fostering an earned, secure attachment to self. The interested, curious, compassionate relationship to the parts allows a secure bond to yourself, a secure base to emerge. And that secure base is inside, where a person knows exactly where to go. When you need comfort or reassurance, you really get inside first. And how to give that to yourself without criticism, without dismissiveness, to be able to respond to your own states, your own sensations, your own emotions, to know that that's an amazing first place to start. You may also want to reach out to others, of course, but to really get that without responding to yourself, sometimes shift does not happen as easily, especially that shift of being able to trust in self, to trust that you will respond to yourself in a way that's helpful, comforting, reassuring, appropriate, which leads to trust in ourselves, which also leads to our ability to feel ourselves and experience ourselves, which strengthens our relationship to ourselves. All of this allows for greater trust in self, confidence, and self-esteem to grow. So inner relationship and outer relationship have a big relationship. When we heal the internal working model of self, it supports the internal working model of other. When we trust ourselves more, we're more likely to trust both our assessments of others, our assessments of situations, and trust that our actions will be neither overreactive or underreactive. And that's really important for our trusting ourselves. We trust in what we might call, from a polyvagal perspective, a neuroceptive match. We feel calm when there's no reason for alarm, and we're alarmed when there's a reason to be alarmed. That builds a cycle, our ability to make those assessments, to respond appropriately, to not over or under respond, builds a cycle of trust in ourselves and the ability to trust in others, because our assessments are more accurate and more trustworthy, and we trust ourselves in those assessments. It doesn't mean we never get it wrong. It means we get it right enough to trust ourselves. And that allows us to move out of living in survival energy into greater aliveness and vitality. I train people, I provide trainings. The next training starts in September in learning inner relationship focusing. This model is incredibly helpful for your relationship to yourself, as well as bringing these skills into your work with others, helping others to develop self and presence, their ability to be with what emerges within with trust, curiosity, interest, compassion, and to bring that self and presence to being with the partial self states who are deeply in need of our attention, sometimes just to be heard in what they're anxious about, other times for comfort or reassurance, to build that secure bond with self in support of the healing. What I'm talking about today in particular is the healing of developmental trauma. So I'm going to stop share these slides. I hope that this has been helpful, as a way of better understanding what happens with developmental trauma, how we live in states that can become really preoccupied physiologically, not like we're thinking about it all the time. We're living it. We're living our anxiousness. We're living our shutdown or our depression or our overreactions or underreactions, and how interrelationship focusing can really help to be with, to understand, to support those preoccupations. So I hope this has been helpful. Always feel free if you have questions, you have comments, I would love to hear from you. And I hope to see you at a further workshop or further training.